it turns out that when Shamima Begum moved to Syria in 2015, the Minister for Immigration and Border Security was James Brokenshire. He's since been promoted and is now the Minister for Local Government. And it's true to say that he's the type of person that justifies the austerity and cuts that have been implemented by the government. Tower Hamlets, where Shamima Begum grew up, has suffered hugely in the cuts, and ironically it is 100 years since Minnie Lansbury, the daughter-in-law of George Lansbury, former head of the Labour Party, was elected a councillor in the London borough of Poplar, which is now Tower Hamlets. Minnie Lansbury went to jail in 1921 because she thought that the settlement that had been reached between local councils and central government was unfair, that the people of Poplar were paying more into central government and getting less overall than Kensington and Chelsea. I don't know how they performed that calculation, but there was something that was called Poplarism, which was the Rates Rebellion, in which 21 councillors were jailed for saying that they would not send any of the money that they had raised as part of their council tax to central government because they didn't think it was being fairly redistributed. Fast forward to today, and the IFS, I think that's the Institute for Fiscal Studies, has just released a report talking about how unfair the government system for allocating revenue to local authorities is. Basically, the wealthy Tory councils are getting all the money and the poorer ones are getting less. So this is very similar to what happened 100 years ago. Now, why do you think this is? Possibly because the philosophy hasn't changed. But interesting that Minnie Lansbury, who was born Minnie Glassman, a daughter of a Jewish refugee, who Minnie Glassman was born in the 1880s, she became a politician and fought against injustice and poverty, along with the suffragettes. She was a bit more radical than them. And now we have Shamima Begum, who, aged 15, thinks that life here is not going to be very good for her, is radicalised online, and when she went to Syria, she actually used her sister's passport, and she should have been checked at the border, but she wasn't. Why? Because James Brokenshire did not ensure that the systems were in place to prevent her from leaving. She was only 15. She was using her sister's passport. She shouldn't have been allowed to leave. She was going to Syria. At that time, everybody knew that that's what the type of thing that was going on, and yet nobody stopped her. Why is that? So who was responsible? Or are we in this type of failure-friendly environment where you're rewarded for failure and nobody talks about it? I think that type of taboo is a type of taboo that should be broken. I think this is the type of reason why people voted for Brexit, because of enormous corruption going on at central government that was going completely unchecked. I mean, the system is out of control, and the likes of Brokenshire, Hancock Javid, these people are dangerous, to say the least. Funnily enough, also, one of the people that's been writing the articles for The Sun is Nick Parker. He's been done for phone hacking and for paying police. He was rewarded by getting his job back. So Murdoch has been pushing this story in the Times and the Sun, and it's obviously been grabbing headlines all over the press. But in actual fact, Murdoch is not regulated. The press is not regulated. They've been talking about protecting Molly Russell, the girl who committed suicide after using lots of Instagram. By the way, she died in 2017. So again, it's quite strange that this story is only out now. It wasn't mentioned throughout most of 2018. Molly Russell, a young white girl who kills herself aged 14, is regarded as a victim, whereas the other one, who's quite clearly been groomed and gone into sexual slavery and crossed a border with her sister's passport, so there are so many different checks that should have been in place to prevent that from happening. They're not there. But luckily enough for Murdoch, he's entirely unregulated. So he'd not actually just had Andy Coulson, his former News of the World editor, as the communications director for Number 10 under Cameron, but his other acolyte, Rebecca Brooks, was on very good terms with David Cameron as well, and with Tony Blair, and he managed to organise, Rupert Murdoch managed to organise for the second part of the Leveson 2 inquiry into press misbehaviour, he managed to get that dropped. So Leveson 1 happened, I think, 2012, and Leveson 2 was supposed to happen, but it was dropped. Why? Because the Conservative government, Matt Hancock in particular, who was the media secretary at the time, is now the health secretary, said we need to stop this from going ahead because lessons have already been learned, let's do self-regulation. So they always go for a form of self-regulation, which generally means no regulation at all. Another worrying thing is that the BBC has just done a report on think tanks, and the report on think tanks is very soft. It only talks about sugar, it hardly talks about Brexit at all, and doesn't really talk about elections very much. So this whole concept of dark money, it doesn't talk about the white nationalist billionaires Robert Mercer and other people like the Koch brothers, who are quite clearly having much more of a say in the direction of the politics in the UK. It doesn't mention the American legislation, the American Legislative Exchange Council, and all of these other things, Atlantic Bridge, Universal Exports Charitable Trust, these people that paid for Adam Verity to go on military junkets with Liam Fox, all of the links to the military industry. None of these things are mentioned. They don't talk about climate change, they don't talk about misogyny. Basically, it was quite a soft report. We did a report for Real Media we put it out in September. We did most of the filming in June or July, in which we asked Peter Jukes of Byline about how the Brexit debate was paid for, and we asked Adam Ramsey of Open Democracy and Matt Hope of DSMOG. They didn't know all of the answers, but they told us what their line of inquiry had been, and that there was a massive link with the use of tax havens. The Panama Papers said a lot, and yeah, regardless of what type of Brexit we get, they told us what some of the consequences would be. This is all pretty sad, dangerous stuff, and unfortunately it's not getting the type of airing that it ought to. I will stop now. Thanks very much for listening.